Ilya was an android specifically designed for tending sheep and often swore, although he was of a rather calm and good-natured disposition. His real name was Marco, and whenever something disturbed his peace, he would always say something like, "Well, for fuck's sake, when are those guys from the city going to bring us the calibrated regulators for mycelial nutrient flow, harmonized with the physiological profile of that datura over there that's so pitifully lacking?" Or, "Well, for fuck's sake, where have you been, my friend?" Every true Elijah, would say something like that. The other android was called Andrea, which some found stupidly funny, what with such a generic name, the android Andrea. Some, whether they were humans, geobots, or androids, simply didn't have a shred of feeling for a quality joke. Blockheads. Of course, the average human shepherd or herder, unlike Ilya, didn't understand the subtleties of the mysterious, complex plant internet, mycorrhizae. But, we'll agree, those were different times when human shepherds tended sheep on the slopes of proud Mountain Velebit, wrapped in heavy sheepskins, smelling even a bit stronger than their furry charges, and refreshing themselves in the clear and icy mountain streams full of trout, only when their Sharplananak and Tornjak dogs began to refuse obedience with disgust. But human shepherds, as far as is known, hadn't been around for some 300 years, and they had been replaced by androids who were carefully programmed to be top-notch shepherds and to mimic shepherd behavior down to the finest detail. They liked really bad. Music were somewhat crude and boorish in nature, but they were very hospitable and would always treat passing travelers to rakija, brandy, and slana. Slana differed from bacon only in some GMO protein modifications that worked better with android AD converters than natural speck or pancetta. Humans could also eat slana, just like potatoes baked in embers. Potatoes didn't differ from regular potatoes, so the difference was purely terminological, at least according to some experts, whatever that was supposed to mean. Interestingly, potatoes were not genetically modified, probably because they originated from the Andean regions of Ecuador and Peru, thus mountainous areas with similar climatic conditions to the glorious Velebit. Androids of their type were constructed in such a way that they needed food, which would be converted into energy for their bodies powered by the so-called chi drive through a complex system. They didn't have a brain, but their most sensitive data processing systems were well protected within their chest, so they themselves often said that they thought with their hearts, and some malicious cynics said they were as empty-headed as their human predecessors. Of course, that was rudeness beyond all bounds, because the shepherd androids were very bright and could do many other more demanding jobs, mostly in the form of hobbies that they used to pass the long winter nights, in their bivouacs and log cabins. Of course, love for horned animals was still their main thread and guiding principle in life, because they were created for that purpose. Andrea and Ilya, sturdy, cheerful, and likable lads, would often sing in carefully programmed disharmony. "Little one, drive the sheep over the hill. Come, my colleague and I will." The creators of the shepherd androids so precisely copied real shepherds that they instilled in them the characteristics of people from those areas, and that was a lack of musical ear and freewheeling sexual habits, such as engaging in threesomes. Natural shepherds did this out of scarcity and for genetic diversity, while our androids were more inclined to experiment, and their sexual life had little to do with reproduction, to put it politely. Human sheep herders naturally tended to become priests and politicians, so the programmers instilled security mechanisms that prevented this, because we all know how it ended for humans when shepherds and highlanders in general came to power somewhere. There were instances where some of the shepherd androids followed this siren call and actually tried to become dishonest politicians, but the security measures would then automatically reset them, and in no time they would cheerfully be burying an axe in a nearby dry hornbeam or beech tree, happy with how well it was going, and they would suddenly long for disharmony, which was not a cappella singing without an accordion, as some wrongly interpreted. Or, in winter periods, they would write their names in the snow with their urine, because their urine was quite distinct, bright, and fluorescent orange. Namely, this made it easier to find them if they got lost in a snowstorm, which could bury the Velebit plateaus in several meters of snow within a few hours. Sometimes one would think that the programmers and hardware engineers who created them were not as clumsy as they seemed when they tried to talk to women. Among them were guys who really knew their stuff and paid attention to useful details. What made Ilya and Andrea special? precisely their hobbies. Namely, in one period, humanity, otherwise known for senseless, bloody wars based on faith and nation, got bogged down in a global war in which anti-vaxxers and vaxxers clashed, and one of the deadly viral pandemics and a nuclear war that started in Eastern Europe did the rest of the job. So in a very short time, 3/4 of humanity died out and most of human technical civilization collapsed in on itself. The internet and social networks disappeared in a single day. This created some new conditions in which humans, geobots, the oldest sentient beings on Earth, formed by evolution from geobacteria, and androids, who finally became equal citizens, were leveled. Nature took care that the plant world, in a very short period of some 200 somewhat agonizing years, covered the remnants of the fallen human civilization. This very fact was the basis of Ilia's hobby, which was the study of mycorrhizae, a kind of plant internet, where information was transmitted through a complex system of fungal mycelia, and which over time connected large parts of the Earth into a whole that communicated very successfully. Within the mycorrhizae, there were also virtual worlds and self-aware beings, unusual natural and upgraded equivalents of former artificial intelligences. These beings were natural constructs, sometimes difficult for other conscious beings to understand, because they behaved quite like humans, only they were extremely inclined to lascivious humor and just childish pranks. They would gather around wells, for some reason they preferred wells to campfires, and sing cheerfully. They would gladly, like children, climb trees, albeit from the inside, as is the way of the plant network, and although they could take any shape for some reason only clear to them, they most often looked primate-like, like humans and beings, from Slavic legends. Ilia was known for being the first to create a hardware assembly that allowed all 3 dominant Earthling species to connect to the global mycorrhizae, which re-enabled networking. The Organization of United Androids, OUA, granted him access to resources with which the skillful Ilia could create innovations, similar to a famous human Nikola Tesla, originally a lad from those areas. Andrea distinguished himself in another field. He was a lad, as the people say, with golden hands. The OUA also provided him with access to raw materials, and thus with great precision and inhuman patience, he crafted ships in bottles, which fundamentally changed relations throughout the entire universe. The entire universe? One might wonder, but how on earth could ships in bottles have such an impact? It would be like someone changing the relations in the universe with some hobby of theirs, e.g. fishing, landscape architecture, or indoor free climbing. But behind this fact lay, at least for a while, a slightly different story. In the area where Ilia and Andrea tended sheep, a spaceship belonging to the insect-like Gibara beings crashed one day. The ship crashed in a clearing in front of their cabin, about 30 meters away. Coincidence? Maybe. Our heroes immediately rushed to help. "Good day, dear guests," said Ilia, beaming, shooing away the dog that had started growling at a spider-like creature. "I am Ilia, a shepherd, an android. Can I be of any assistance? Good day." Apparently this race already had translators for Earth languages. "We are the Gibari, and as you can see, we're in a fucking fucked up situation. Luckily, none of us got seriously injured." "Hey, lads, come on into our humble little cabin," said Andrea, approaching. "It's warm, we have fine homemade rakija, and we'll bake you some potatoes and slana, bacon. Have a bite, rest up, and then we'll see how we can help." "Awesome, brother, awesome. You guys are fucking legends," said the insect-like being cheerfully. And Ilia and Andrea looked at each other in wonder. To save time on superfluous descriptions and potentially tedious digressions, things developed very quickly. As the well-meaning shepherds rushed to their aid, the insect-like beings, out of gratitude, revealed to them the secrets of their interstellar drive, which worked on some mixture of teleportation and technology and was capable of transporting matter to wherever the pilot imagined it should go. They also telepathically implanted several of their standard destinations just in case, and added a few more useful technological insights. Ilia and Andrea were aware that such rapid technological advancement could easily be misused, and the Gibari, precisely because of this, asked our heroes that the whole thing remain a secret. Little by little, in about 2 weeks, they repaired the ship with the help of our shepherds and materials that the OUA sent to Andrea. When they finished the repairs, they said goodbye to their hosts, saying that it was best that the first contact went like this, because then everyone would make a circus and drama out of it, and that would seriously piss them off at the moment. Obviously, their translation systems were not perfectly tuned, so completely unaware of it, they expressed themselves somewhat inappropriately to interstellar travelers, although, to be honest, there had always been all sorts of disreputable riffraff among that crew, completely without manners or upbringing. After they warmly embraced each other, but not our shepherds, their ship simply disappeared in about 2 minutes, and Ilya and Andrea didn't stop laughing for a good 5 minutes, so that the shepherd, Sharpleninik and Tornyak dogs looked at them worriedly, fearing that their masters had lost their minds. One of them, still a small puppy, even whined a little. "Ah ha ha ha, what characters these are," chuckled Ilya, gently taking the puppy in his arms and scratching its round belly. "So they just hugged each other like that, the fools." "Hee hee hee," Andrea joined in, slapping him on his broad shoulders so hard it echoed. "Hee hee hee." The puppy whined again, so Ilya calmed it down, stroking it. Very quickly, using the knowledge they had picked up from the insect-like beings, our androids achieved worldwide fame without any intention or ambition. As soon as Ilya, armed with new knowledge, made devices with which he could connect to the mycorrhizae and entering that biological network world, he learned that it had its own inhabitants and virtual worlds. He befriended the first being from the mycelial internet he met, Svarog. Svarog was a cheerful fellow, and soon introduced him to his closest circle, Perunica, Perun, Veles, Svantavid, and Zora, named after Slavic gods. After just a few days, Ilya was jumping over wells with them and joking so immaturely, problematically, and politically incorrect that the leaves would fall off the nearby blackberry bushes, whose sweet fruits attracted bears with the same passion, as the siren call attracted unfortunate sailors. So one day, Ilya leaned over a well and later stared at Svarog in amazement. "What is it?" asked his friend, at that moment dapperly covered in colorful feathers. "Well, look in the well. It's a miracle." As Svarog leaned over the well, Ilya tipped him over and threw him in. The whole group burst into laughter, and the well echoed with Svarog's chuckling. "Oh, Ilya, you're just like one of us, our mycorrhizal mycelium," said Svantavid. "Who would have thought an android would have such a wonderful sense of humor?" "Excellent, excellent," came a voice from the well. "Come on, get me out." Of course, they left him in the well for a whole day, until he lowered the pH of the entire mycorrhizae, thus visualizing and creating a pile of gravel down which he rolled to the bottom of the slope. Don't ask what it's about. These are completely incomprehensible things to any normal person. The beings from the mycorrhizae were, besides political incorrectness and mockery, prone to gossip and sensationalism, so the entire mycelial world learned about Elisha within a few days, and as our hero unselfishly shared his knowledge with both humans and geobots, soon everyone was talking about the shepherd android who was very skilled in network business and a super guy. Thus, the whole world also learned about Andrea's skill in making ships in bottles. These were small, fully functional spaceships, which had an advanced Gibari drive and could be used to send messages to any part of the universe. Ilya, as a great secret, confided in the beings from the mycorrhizae about the visit of the insect-like beings, and they immediately blabbed it all over the world because keeping secrets was a completely foreign concept to them. Since the exchange of information was the basis of their existence, they considered it something bad and undesirable. Soon, numerous engineers came to our shepherds, and in a 2-week seminar with terrible music, potatoes, and slana, they taught them everything they knew. However, a problem arose. Somehow, none of the Earth races managed to build large ships, and Andrea and Ilya in no way wanted to leave their sheep and dogs when they were told they were needed in research laboratories. They even tried to threaten them, but then Svarog, Veles and Perun told those unpleasant types that they could forget about the mycorrhizae because they wouldn't allow their friends to be harassed. Also, the larger part of the Earth community of humans, geobots, and androids was on the side of our lads, so the malicious detractors had to back down, and they found a compromise solution where both Ilya and Andrea collaborated with them, remotely via the mycorrhizae. Andrea realized that he had to ask the insect-like beings what they were doing wrong, so he decided to send them a message. The two of them went out of their little cabin and gazed at the blue sky, dotted with only a few clouds. Andrea held the bottle with the ship in his hands. "So, how are we going to send them this message? And where to?" Ilya asked him. "Well, I don't know. That drive works on intention, and our intentions are clear and honorable. We want to go into space, and we want to know how to make big ships." As he said this, only the bottle remained in his hands, and the ship vanished without a trace. "Whoa, look at this," said Ilya. "Yeah, and how will we know if they reply?" "No idea, buddy." Some time passed, and our shepherds returned to their daily routines. They led the sheep to the watering hole, threw stones from their shoulders, baked potatoes and slana with grouse eggs in their humble log cabin on the edge of the forest. Occasionally, the inhabitants of the city would visit them, bringing them food and materials for Andrea's projects. They would always kindly host them, but they refused to give statements to the hollow news and 3D portals that appeared soon after the world re-networked. Social networks also emerged, where female admirers who saw the shepherds as influencers sent them their nude pictures and hollow video messages, and in return, they would send them hollow pictures of the proud mountain massif, numerous sheep, deer, at the watering hole, and their sizable genitalia. But we won't dwell too much on their somewhat exotic sexuality now. It seemed as if the fallen Earth was returning to some normal state, much better and more orderly than during the chaos before. The catastrophe. Oddly enough, Valus, as a virtual being from the Mycorrhizae, soon became the mayor of the city. The other beings supported the idea of being led by a newly discovered creature from a world little or not at all known to them until then. Since he was depicted in ancient legends as the god of horned cattle, and he himself had sizable, lordly horns, our androids voted for him with all their hearts. The Geobots had known about the beings from the Mycorrhizae for millions of years. But that's a completely different story. After some time, the ship reappeared in the bottle from which they had sent the message. They took it out in front of the cabin and looked at it curiously, when suddenly a 3D image of the insect-like being appeared and addressed them in their problematic way. "Hey, sweethearts, we got your message. We're really glad you got in touch. Fuck what you blabbed to the others about us and the ships. The solution is very simple, and we obviously forgot to tell you. Each of these small ships can be enlarged to the size you need. You just have to tell them, but not in a crude way, but nicely and politely. Go ahead, enlarge one and let us know how it went. And when the situation is like that, then we'll see each other soon. Love you, XYKXX, and kisses from GQQXYXX. And to brag, we have our beautiful larvae, and we're thinking of feeding them enzymes so they resemble GQQXYX when they grow up. Because she's a fucking doll, so our daughters should be like that too." Andrea and Ilya started chuckling again. "Should we tell them their translator works like it was programmed by some disreputable vagabonds?" said Andrea. "Nah, better not," grinned Ilya. "The Mycorrhizae crew will love their exotic style, especially when they see the faces of the guests at the big official contact with the whole Earth. That'll be a circus for sure. And so, that very day, they started trying to enlarge one of the ships, but again, nothing happened." "Okay," said Andrea. "If we were dealing with the Mycorrhizae crew, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave us the wrong instructions just for fun, but the Gibari aren't like that. We've overlooked something again. It'll definitely be something very simple. What if we try..." "What?" "Well, that ship is still in the bottle. Their big ship wasn't. Maybe we should break the bottle? There's surely a simpler and better way," Andrea began, scratching his belly. "What if we try asking the ship to come out of the bottle first? Doesn't cost us anything?" Andrea took the bottle with the ship and carried it out to the clearing in front of the cabin. Ilya followed closely behind, holding a bottle of rakia in one hand, from which he would take a swig every now and then and frown, because it was strong. Then he would take another small sip and frown again. "How are we going to do this?" he said. "Well, let's try," said Ilya. Here, little ship, please come out of the bottle." Nothing happened. "Maybe you should rephrase it a bit so it's not so childish, like from a fairy tale, more like how they would..." Dear spaceship, my dear brother, please get out of the fucking bottle. I swear on my mother. And that, of course, worked. The ship appeared in front of them at that moment and landed silently on the grass and dry leaves. There was also some coarse sawdust from a chainsaw to satisfy those who like to split hairs. And some twigs. And now I kindly ask you enlarge yourself so that you can fit, how many shall we say? 10 standard people. Of course, they had moved back a bit, and the ship enlarged itself at that very moment. They curiously entered it and expressed their intention to be taken to the center of the city. As they went to the city in an instant, the whole world soon learned about this event. They very quickly enlarged Andrea's other ships and sent one to Giravu, the Gibari home planet. Soon, official diplomatic relations were established. Connected to the new global network, the whole world watched the broadcast of the arrival of the insect-like delegation. For ambassador, they naturally chose Gix-Yax because he was already in contact with the inhabitants of Earth anyway. He soon appeared before everyone and said, "Where are you, Earthlings? Going well, eh? As you know, we already know these two fucking guys, Ilya and Andrea, and we're really glad you've all nicely mastered this space travel thing. Now you'll soon meet, how do you say it, a shitload and 800 more space races, and it will become clear to all of you that everything is okay. Welcome to space." Most Earthlings looked at this welcoming speech in astonishment, and as the shepherds had predicted, the Slavic gods were delighted above all with the content, and then with the reaction to XXYX's speech. The beings from the Mycorrhizae readily expressed themselves in emojis, which they considered a beautiful new form of expressing feelings. Svarog and Perunica hugged each other with tears of joy in their eyes, and Veles simply nodded in approval. When the cameraman turned the shot to Ilya and Andrea, they just shrugged their broad shoulders, which their shepherd's sheepskins made even broader, with a smile. And so, in a somewhat unusual way, Earth became part of the global space community, which later, as already mentioned, fundamentally changed relations throughout the entire universe, and our shepherds returned to their sheep after 3 days, because, as the people say, every wonder lasts 3 days. Epilogue. The story of the android shepherds could have ended there, but somehow it turned out that they always remained somewhat mysterious to the rest of humanity and avoided contact with journalists and portals, mostly because their urges to engage in politics or religion were blocked, which also blocked any excessive ambition and the ability to lie. One day, a famous journalist from the largest city portal, Aye, arrived unannounced on their mountain in a small Gibari two-seater. Ilya and Andrea kindly showed her the sheep, the spring, and the dogs, then gave her potatoes, slana, and rakia, and then they sang her a song about 2 shepherds and a girl. One thing led to another, and after about 2 hours she lay in their company, naked and sweaty among the blankets, quite tired but also satisfied. Say, Ilya, tell me. I'm just curious, what's the deal with your sexuality? Look, we've shared some of that now, but you two spend most of your time alone. Are you two... No, we're not programmed that way. We're shepherds for horned cattle. And then the sheep? Do androids dream of electric sheep? You never stir things up where you work, if you know what I mean. It never turns out well. Ilya sometimes showed truly unexpected wisdom. So then, how do you do it? Wait, there are no cows here on the mountain? The journalist was sharp. Does that mean you're goat? Look, that's always a bit of an ugly and condescending word. Would you like some more rakija, dear? Andrea interjected. I would. And Slana? Sure. Enjoy next amazing story. As strange as it may seem, this story is based on real events. Comrades and fellow comrades, this is a story that relies quite heavily on real events. Even when supernatural beings, people possessed by demons or abducted by body snatchers, anti-fascist priests, and the establishment of the Istrian resistance movement on the wrong side of Uchka in the picturesque Gorsky Kotar region are mentioned. Istria, a pearl of hedonism, beauty, and ancient magic, was often occupied by various invaders. So we will briefly describe the unusual events that took place immediately before the liberation from the fascist occupiers and annexation to the motherland, which, as we all know, took place on September 25, 1943, in Pazin. The conversations, which mostly took place in the Croatian Chekavian dialect and Venetian Italian, will be translated into standard Shtokavian Croatian to make things clearer to a wider readership. First of all, let's recall some of the circumstances that preceded the events that will be discussed. First, it is necessary to determine who were the good guys and who were the bad guys, because there are some disagreements about this nowadays. So, the good guys were the local partisans, in whose ranks were Croats, Italians, witches, spellcasters, and even some Slovenes. The villains, on the other hand, were fascists from Italy and a part of the local population, and among the supernatural beings, a few orcs also joined them. Also, all the forces of demons and a dark race of body snatchers from space secretly allied themselves with the fascists. As we all know well, all supernatural beings in Istria are actually visitors from space, stranded across our planet, which for millennia was a penal colony for the worst space scum. Whoever happened to survive the medieval Inquisition settled nicely in Istria, even if they were a vampire, like the famous Jurigrando, whose descendants are the heroes of our story. Unlike their father, Josip and Mario did not drink blood and passionately read philosophical works of dubious sanity, but they knew how to bore a person to death with tedious stories about barrel making and chestnut picking, so that, like characters from classic Russian literature, the unfortunate person they were chatting with would suddenly get a fever and die within a few days. Also, any careless passerby who would start a conversation with them in the warm oak comfort of a bar would feel shifts in the passage of time, because under the immense pressure, every second would become like an hour. Later, if they were not saved with at least half a liter of Medica or Bisca, they would also die from temporal distortion caused by prolonged exposure to supernatural boredom. Fortunately, the locals knew that Bisca helps, so they drank it in their company and constantly tried to interrupt them. Again, every now and then someone would suffer, but the brothers were not blamed for it because they knew that the boys did not have bad intentions. Every time someone succumbed to their energy vampirism or temporal distortion, the two of them would sincerely apologize to the bereaved family and would not show up at the local tavern for about 10 days, so everyone would start to miss them. Takabri. Occupation began with a story seen many times before. That is, the righteous protection of allegedly endangered members of one nation in another country. As we all know, this is a classic doctrine used by fascists of various colors and shapes throughout history and up to the present day, and with which a carefully organized war of conquest was always justified as philanthropic protection of ours from theirs. Ive was a handsome young man who was always up for a good drink, conversation, song, and all forms of hedonism, including rolling around with buxom female comrades in fine, fragrant hay, watched by the curious eye of some voyeuristic ox. Since he had unfortunately failed a grade in high school, he fled to the partisans so that his father, the hard-working carpenter Tony, wouldn't beat him like an ox in cabbage. Old Tony believed that his son hadn't turned out right. That is, he hadn't inherited the carpentry trade and wasn't exactly a guy for excessive physical labor. He was especially annoyed when Ive would say that he was a man of intellect and music, they both played the button accordion excellently, and not of strong and unintelligent hands. To this provocation, Tony would always take out a slat and beat him like the aforementioned ox in cabbage. This relationship terribly bothered his mother Dragica, who went on a pilgrimage to Tursat because of it and asked Our Lady not to beat Ivan so much. Since nothing changed later, she concluded that Our Lady didn't care at all about her son's well-being, so she later prayed to God. There wasn't much help there either, despite cutting out the intermediary. Of course, Ive was an excellent fellow, whom everyone loved. But besides fleeing to the partisans from his father's justified anger, he knew how to do a few more mischievous things. Thus, in Brod na Kupi, he mined a bridge so that the Germans could not pass with tanks, and since the river there is only about a foot deep, the tanks calmly and without problems passed by the destroyed bridge. Whenever one of the well-known offensives took place, Ive would take a week's leave and come to his mother for home-cooked food and clean, fragrant bedding, and then he would return later. No one would consider him a deserter because he explained to them that he longed for domestic comfort and the enemies were persistently trying to kill him, which may be characteristic of wartime events, but again, not at all pleasant and beyond any appeal. His fellow fighters approved of this because Ive was not a man for trenches, mud, cold, and gunfire, but he played the accordion really well and had a pleasant, cheerful disposition. He was also very skilled in logistics and generous, so his comrades were never hungry or without brandy. Thus, once upon a time, he and his best war buddy, the sorcerer Joj, were breaking through as couriers from Gorsky Kotar with some order. They had to deliver to the commander. They crossed High Uchka Mountain and walked towards Pazin when Joj stopped and halted his friend. "What's wrong?" said Ive. "Italians," the sorcerer whispered quietly. "Ours or theirs?" "Theirs." "And how do you know that?" Ive wondered. "Can you hear them?" "No, they're too far away," said Joj. "You know we have special senses." "Well, when you say senses, that means you heard something," Ive philosophized. "Besides, why are you speaking quietly when they can't hear us?" "You never know," said Joj, a little taken aback and speaking a bit louder. Yes, knowledge is fragile. Maybe love could happen to us." "What?" Joj had traditional views. "There are only 3 of them, and I think they're the demon-possessed kind. They have blue auras. Shall we?" "What?" "Well, attack them. Are we partisans or what?" "We shall," our hero said bravely, and Joj just nodded in approval. They decided to approach them by pretending to be their tipsy cronies, so when they finally got closer, they staggered through the olive grove, singing out of tune, "Giovinazza, Giovinezza, primavera di bellezza." The 3 by the fire looked at them and toasted them with raised right hands, sizing up the surrounding olive trees, so Ive and Joj easily reached them. They were guys with neatly trimmed mustaches, beards, and sideburns, and lacking girls. To catcall, they had previously walked through the forest unsuccessfully trying to compliment truffles into revealing themselves. Our heroes chatted with them, drank some local Terran wine, stolen from unwilling peasants, and then they looked at each other and in an instant put on their caps. The young fascists, since they were truly possessed by demons, recoiled from the pentagrams and fled headlong. It is a well-known fact that demons are not afraid of the cross. They even maliciously preferred to take extremely devout people as hosts, but they fled from the red 5-pointed star like the devil from incense. Joj and Ive ran after them, but couldn't catch up, so they stopped and returned to the fire, where their weapons and canteens of wine remained. They sat down, still catching their breath, rolled some tobacco, and took to the drink. "I almost feel a little sorry for them," said Ive, blowing out smoke with satisfaction and disassembling the captured Beretta. "Imagine how panicky they are about the 5-pointed star. I could bet that if they survive, even their grandchildren will shy away from that symbol," said Joj. "And from us, communists." As they had drunk a little, they also sang an Italian partisan song, "Mi son alzato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 una mattina mi son alzato, e ho trovato l'invasor." Then they checked once more if anyone was nearby, and then they came across a church where the local parish priest fed them and hid them in the hayloft from the enemy. When they woke up the next day, they continued their journey on foot, and every now and then avoided enemy patrols and ambushes, where Yosip's sorcerer senses helped a lot. Ive stuck to his reliable friend, who was also half a spellcaster, so he hexed one group of soldiers with an incantation that caused leaves to grow all over their bodies, and they took root in the fertile Istrian red soil. Since trees live a long time, some claim they are still there today. The friends headed towards Pazin to deliver Comrade Tito's messages to their comrades as soon as possible, which everyone was eagerly awaiting. Along the way, they had lunch, in a lonely inn, constantly on guard, checking if an enemy patrol was coming. They had just concluded that everything was going well when 5 fascists entered the inn, noisily ordering wine from the innkeeper and suspiciously and gloomily eyeing the guests. Joj and Ive sat in a dark corner of the room, and when one of them approached, they just looked at each other, and both silently fired their captured pistols, wiping out the entire patrol in the blink of an eye. The other guests later gladly helped them throw the bodies into a nearby pit rich in karst formations. When they returned, the innkeeper brought them a goblet of wine, and Umberto, a local Italian anti-fascist, and Franina, a guy they immediately guessed was from Buzet because he spoke Kaikavian Croatian, sat down with them. The innkeeper was a former miner, the enigmatic Labanjon, so they could barely understand him, but the very dark wine enlivened their heroic spirits. And soon the song rang out, "Our children, your dawn is shining, don't be afraid while there are communists." The tipsy Franina kept asking about Yosip's sorcerer powers, so Ive carefully separated them, before his friend turned the careless young man into a spittoon or cast a curse on him that would have been even worse. Little by little, everyone weakened and went their own way. Ive and Joj decided to go a little further and find a hidden place to spend the night. The moonlight shone brightly, and after about 2 hours of walking, both friends sat down on a fallen log and each rolled a cigarette in paper that Joj took out of his backpack. "What a beautiful night," said Ive, inhaling the smoke with pleasure. "We could use some girls." Yeah, said Joj absently, looking somewhere towards the maquis shrubland. "Hey, where are you looking?" "I'm looking. Something is moving towards us." "Where?" Joj just nodded his head to show him where to look, and Ive quietly and intently reached for his shotgun. Joj also grabbed his carbine when a huge boar, whose territory they had unknowingly entered, charged at them from the darkness. Both fired, almost at the same moment, and fortunately, that stopped the animal, which is only more dangerous than a wounded and enraged bear. For the next hour, they separated pieces of juicy meat by the fire, which they would take with them as a gift to friends and family in Pazin. "They'll be happy when we bring them this. My mother-in-law will make a wonderful stew from it, and we'll all enjoy good food." "And I'll bring gnocchi. My Nona makes them excellently," Ive said approvingly, packing a good few kilograms of meat into his backpack. "And there will be some for bean stew too. I have a prosciutto bone at home that will smell nice, and there's young corn right now." After that, they gathered hay and went to sleep, caressed by the gentle breeze of the warm summer night, in which the scents of lavender, rosemary, and wormwood could be felt. Ive didn't worry that someone would attack them in their sleep because Joj had such keen senses that he would wake up at the slightest suspicious sound. After a long day, they arrived in Pazin and first stopped by the headquarters. Comrade Antonina, a lovely girl from the nearby village of Sberlini, greeted them. They were more than surprised when they were told that Italy had capitulated the day before their arrival. She asked them to give her the letter with the orders, so Joj looked for it in his backpack, but it wasn't there, no matter how carefully he searched. "No letter?" Ive whispered quietly. We're really screwed. When did we lose it? Could someone have stolen it?" "No," Joj frowned and looked at him unhappily. "It seems to me we smoked it yesterday when we were rolling cigarettes in the dark. We're real geniuses." "Indeed," said Ive, embarrassed. "What are we going to do now? They'll shoot us for sure." Ive thought for a moment, frowned, then something occurred to him, and he smiled. "Leave it to me. We'll improvise a little, but we'll keep our heads on our shoulders." When all the headquarters staff had gathered, he sat them down and looked at them cheerfully. They returned his gaze somewhat reservedly, but Ive puffed out his chest and began, "My comrades and fellow comrades, we all know that yesterday Mussolini's Italy capitulated, so the time has come for a decision on the annexation of Istria to the motherland. Comrade Tito's decisions were so secret that we are conveying them verbally. They must not fall into the hands of the enemy." "And? What are these decisions?" Nina asked them. "Well, to go into a general uprising." "Wait, they've already capitulated." "Doesn't matter. We have plenty of work to do here. We need to capture all the fascists, liberate Pula, and change the names back to Croatian," said Ive, while Joj just hid his gaze, feeling very uncomfortable. The partisans at headquarters weren't entirely clear on everything, but Ive still conveyed the message to them, which was roughly as he had said. A little awkward and clumsy, but they managed to get by without harming anyone. In the next few days, about 10,000 brave Istrians were under arms, and they very easily overcame the resistance of fascist soldiers, carabinieri, supernatural beings, and dark demons. The sons of Vamir Giurigrando, Josip and Mario, distinguished themselves by their self-sacrifice and bravery in the fight against demons. But despite this, there were people who avoided them. Everything happened so quickly that Ive and Joj were quite surprised by the result of their improvisation. "See, this turned out really well," said Ive after one of the battles, cheerfully drinking bisca from his canteen and offering it to his friend. Joj took the canteen and took a sip. I wouldn't want to spoil your fun, but somehow all this seems a little too easy, he said, and looked worriedly towards the horizon where lead-gray clouds were gathering, foreshadowing an approaching storm. Of course, the wise sorcerer was right. Later events brought many merciless battles and tragic victims, and the cruelty of the Germans and their local allies was indescribable. In those battles, the young Franina, whom they mistakenly thought was from Buzet, but was actually a young man from Zagorje, disappeared for several days. However, Frantek later achieved an enviable career, but we won't go into that. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.